A very warm welcome, dear colleagues, to the second session of the ISIE SEM Perpetual Online Conference. My name is Stefan Giljum. I'm from the Vienna University of Economics in Austria, and I have the great pleasure to chair this session. The topic of today's session will be spatially explicit SEM research. And we have a set of 4 excellent speakers. So I really look forward to the next 1.5 hours. But before we start, I would like to give the floor to Hiroki Tanikawa, who is the head of the SEM section board, to give us some welcoming words. Hiroki, please.
Thank you, Stefan. It's really happy to have this online session today. I hope that everybody being safe under the current situation of the very difficult situation of around COVID-19 situations. But on behalf of the ISIE SEM, the SEM is a Socioeconomic Metabolism section. I really appreciate you to join this meeting. And SEM conference is originally called Corner Count Conference in the Europe, starting from Europe. And that is in 2001 in the first the meeting, which is in Stockholm. In this year, we originally planned the 2020 ISIE SEM conference in Sendai in Japan. But as you know, in this situation, we need to change that. Also, we need to have the new step of the new conference style. So that's why we try to open our conference online, but not only online, but for we are trying to do the perpetual conference systems. So most of every month that we are trying to do the one special sessions. And then the last month, we have the first session. It's actually in the July that we have the first session, which is we are doing the special session in the topic of SEM and also the COVID-19. That is a really hot topic in this situation. That is led by the Professor Tomer Fishman from Israel. And the second session today, thank you very much for the Professor Stefan Giljum is organizing the very hot topic, spatially explicit SEM research. And that is, I also very much appreciate all speakers today and also the all audience joining today. And also we had very small announcement for the third session will be October. We have another special sessions, the resource constraint over green transitions. So I hope you to be there as well. So as I said, that we are trying to do every month. We are trying to keep doing for the special sessions until maybe the next big conference of ISIE. So I hope you all will have more interest and also regarding to the industrial ecology and also socioeconomic metabolism research, and hope to enjoy the perpetual conference. Okay, thank you very much. Stefan, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hiroki, for these introductory words. I go back to the program. Yeah, we selected the issue of spatially explicit research on socioeconomic metabolism because we recently see a surge in research being conducted based on new types of data, large-scale data sets, which also have a fine geographical resolution to allow tackling industrial ecology-related issues from a completely new perspective. And we want to, with this online session, exchange some recent experiences and some first examples of research in the industrial ecology area where these new data sets have been used. Yeah, just on the practical side, each of the 4 speakers will have 15 minutes time for presentation, plus 5 minutes question and answers. And you in the audience, I would invite you for your questions either to use your microphone, or you can also write your questions into the chat function in Zoom, so I can also pick them up as we go. Yeah, one final remark. In the first session, as Hiroki mentioned around 2 months ago, we had 3 speakers only. Today we have 4 speakers, which forces us to cut the program a bit in a way that a general discussion will likely not be possible within the 1.5 hour time slot. However, I can announce that 2 of the speakers, Victor and Neus, will be available for an additional 15 minutes after the official ending of the session to continue discussion in case there are still urgent issues to be asked and answered. Yeah, so as the program is quite ambitious for the next 1.5 hours, I don't want to lose any more time. And I jump to our first presenter, which is Dan Moran from the NTNU in Trondheim. And he will give us an overview of how Earth observation data can be coupled with supply chain models and which new options arise from this coupling. Dan, welcome to our session, and the floor is yours.
There we go, rookie error, I was muted. Thank you, Stefan, so much. Yeah, this is a really cool session, and it's also super nice to see so many names that I know on the chat, so it's really well attended. I'm really happy to see everyone here, and I think we have a really cool panel, so I'm looking forward to watch all the sessions. This topic of kind of connecting spatial data to footprints and to life cycle analysis is a really interesting area, and I think super promising. So I'll give a bit of an introduction of the, or an overview of the field. I think I won't go into too much detail on it, but I just give my picture on why we're doing this basically. This is coming from a commentary article that myself, in association with input from Stefan and Keiichiro Konomoto, who I see on the call, and Javier Godard, who runs the Trace.Earth project, we wrote a commentary in One Earth called From Satellite to Supply Chains, Connecting Earth Observation Data to Supply Chain Models. And the commentary was kind of describing why we think what the advantages of connecting spatial data to industrial ecology tools are, and kind of setting out the research agenda for what are the promising ways forward. So the article is kind of meant as an easy to read overview for non-specialists to kind of learn about the field. So the sessions today, you'll see a lot more detail about all the methods and kind of how it's used, but I think I wanted to give a bit of the rationale for why we think this is a promising way forward. I think where we all started from is we kind of consistently see that while LCA and IO have been, or input-output in particular, have been giving really nice results, and LCA has been useful in industry for sure and for government decisions, but the LCA data are always so specific. They apply to particular products and processes, so they don't scale up, and they never cover the entire economy. They don't talk about services. There's just huge areas of kind of social and policy questions which LCA data don't have the scope to cover. And then at the same time, we have input-output databases, which have kind of the same methodological approach of kind of decomposing the supply chain, but those don't have the level of product and sectoral specificity needed to make really precise actionable decisions. So current tools basically fall short. The IO databases are too coarse, the sector resolution isn't good enough, and the LCA data, it's not comprehensive enough. And also the LCAs are inevitably very labor intensive. Anyone who's done an LCA knows how much work it is to do even one product or process. And then kind of connected to that or adjacent to that problem is the fact that there's this huge wealth of environmental impact data on how the status of the environment, but this is all measured in physical units. So kind of hectares of forest lost or grams of pollutants released. And that needs to be connected to monetary units in order to inform actual decisions. Like companies and city governments, they make decisions using Excel, usually in monetary units. So kind of and this is a big advantage of environmentally extended IO, is that that's a framework that helps you connect financial transactions and monetary units, and you allocate the physical stresses associated with those economic activities. So the IO, the environmentally extended IO framework already provides a great way to exactly connect physical stresses to processes, to kind of economic decisions in monetary units. And then if we look at the big picture, there's a huge wealth of remote sensing and a large scale environmental data. But we believe that this is basically in the wrong place. There's billions of euros of money invested in satellites, airplanes, large scale remote sensing of the environment. So there's a huge wealth of data on the kind of state of the environment. That's GHG emissions, forest loss, like a range of environmental stressors, but that's not connected to actually economic decisions. So how is it that we have both kind of a real-time observatory of our planet, and yet most of that information never makes it onto the Excel sheets and the desks of people actually making everyday decisions? So that's where we think, that's the big picture where we think the hybrid LCA and the spatially extended IO can offer a solution. It's a way forward to increase the resolution of IO accounts. And I'm kind of using the terms hybrid LCA and spatially resolved IO interchangeably, because kind of at a methodological level, you're really, the two become unified. You know, in hybrid LCA, you split an IO sector into constituent smaller sectors, or if we think of that in spatial terms, you split it not into subsectors, but into subpixels. So not just the car industry, but the car industry in this pixel, car industry in that pixel, or forestry industry in this pixel versus that pixel. So kind of conceptually, it's a continuous spectrum from current MRIO databases through to hybrid IO kind of methods, and then connect that to spatial and to spatially extended IO databases. Yeah, so the key trick in building, in connecting spatial data to IO accounts is that we need what we're kind of calling spatial production inventories. That's a way to link, we need to move from country X makes product Y to where in country X is product Y produced. So there are several data sets that start to work on this, and I think Victor will talk much more about this. This is a really big point of the fine print project. And there are several relevant data sets for different things, but to map economic activity to spatial locations where that activity occurs. So we have map spam maps, which show where different crops are grown. We have some maps of mining sites and power plants to show where those facilities are. In the US, for example, there's almost county level GDP data that tells you kind of what are the main economic activities occurring in each county. So that's kind of disaggregating different economic activities to spatially resolved units that are smaller than countries. And also we think that machine learning could be a really powerful technology, because that's a great kind of approach for connecting multiple sources of data together to inform a disaggregation model. So for example, on forest cover loss, we might know that we observe forest cover loss, but we might not be sure whether it's due to forestry activity or due to disease or fire. And you can bring multiple sources of information like heat sensors, proximity to roads, multiple sources of information together, and use kind of statistics or machine learning approaches to tease apart or allocate the most likely causes of an activity. So the trick is, once we've mapped a sector to a specific spatial footprint, then we can overlay those that sector's physical spatial footprint with observed environmental stresses. That's the trick of spatially extended footprinting. Yeah, a few limitations, of course, as with any academic method. A big one is that the economic activity, so if we just associate economic activities and have a spatial overlap with an environmental stress, so we see the power plant is here, and therefore we assume therefore the CO2 emissions are occurring here, that example works. But if we think about water stress, we can say the cotton is grown here, but actually the environmental impact may be occurring somewhere else. Actually, the impact of that cotton's water use might be upstream in terms of kind of water withdrawal from a at-risk ecosystem upstream, or vice versa. It could be outside the pixel downstream. So if you've added some kind of a pesticide at that farm, that leaches out or runs out through waterways and occurs somewhere else. So there can be the case that environmental impact is not physically overlapped with the economic activity which drives it. That's a known limitation. It's not clear how often that happens. I think kind of intuitively, most impacts happen near or can be attributed to happen near where the driving activity is, but it's something that needs to be kept in mind. And another big limitation, and that's just due to current data absence, although I'm not sure that the data situation is really poised to improve, is that we don't know in the economic flows, we don't know where specific products are going. If they're, and the key here is for exported products may have a different environmental profile than domestically bound products. So, you know, coffee, it could be that coffee grown in a country is grown in a different region or has a different environmental production profile than coffee if it's bound for export versus bound for domestic. And that's something that's going to affect where we think the industry is and the environmental intensity of that industry in that place. And currently there's pretty weak data on which products from which places are sent to domestic versus foreign uses. But that could potentially be important if we discover that some products have a quite different production profile between their, you know, domestic and versus foreign bound counterparts. So those are kind of two areas of limitations that we think should be kept in mind. Another point that we kind of wanted to bring out in the commentary was that we also wanted to ask the natural science community to do more to help connect their environmental data to economic decisions. To some extent, this is a political problem. Like when we were working with the biodiversity data from IUCN, they were actually kind of, as IUCN Red List was organizationally very cautious of attributing species threats to particular industries. Even if they knew that one particular species was threatened by a particular crop or industry, they would rather attribute it to agriculture in general than to a particular crop or product, because it kind of wasn't worth the political cost. They would encounter more resistance and have more trouble building any kind of attribution link between the observed threat and the economic activity if they tried to go to a particular industry. So there could be that political pushbacks that make it more difficult, or reasons for why natural science communities are reticent to attribute observed impacts to more precise economic activities. But at the same time, we also feel that often natural sciences or kind of people working with satellite data, they actually may have even more precise sense of which industries are actually causing this. And we kind of wanted them to help step up their game and learn more about the relevant economic classifications so they can kind of attribute and tag environmental stresses or observed environmental activity to economic activities using HS codes, industry codes, GICS codes, kind of any form of economic tagging would be useful. Yeah, so that's the points there. I think I'm almost wrapping up here. So the kind of argument we wanted to bring is that there's a huge wealth of near real time and incredibly detailed remote sensing data, and industrial ecology has kind of on its table already the relevant tools and conceptual frameworks to connect that remote sensing data to economic decisions, which is what actually drives everyday change, what actually drives change on climate. I mean, how are we going to address the climate change challenge? It's going to be through monetary decisions. And so we need to help link environmental stress and make that so that the environmental data is not just sitting on one side of the desk or in a different room, but is actually connected to the monetary kind of monetary tools. Like, there's a little infographic in the article which kind of shows the advantage of moving from country level statistics, which is what we said a traditional IO method, to remote sensing and like spatially detailed ways. where we detail, so not just that an industry occurs in a country, but where within the country, which pixels where is that industry active. So that's a spatial production inventory, and then overlay that with some various observations of environmental stress associated with it. That infographic we put some work into, so if you want to share it around and kind of use that as a way to easily communicate the idea of spatial footprints, that's also totally welcome to do that. Yeah, so I think just to wrap up here, we really felt that there were there's just a big divide between on the business and kind of policy community. They're always asking for more precise, actionable information, more granular data, and actually bring the environmental data, which is currently used generally in policy discussions only as to frame big picture discussions. But we want to bring that data to their actual Excel sheets and economic models, which they use on a day-to-day basis. And then on the natural science side, we also see there's so much work and investment done on the natural sciences with remote sensing that's actually never used in kind of human society. It's kind of left, it informs debates at a high level, but it doesn't come down into specific Excel-based decisions. So we feel that the spatial footprinting tool is really a promising way to connect those two worlds. Here's a little screenshot of the article. Yeah, and so I think it provides an overview. Again, we tried to make it short and easy to read, so hopefully it provides some overview of our collective ideas for the field. So, and I really want to thank my co-authors on the article. It was just really a pleasure to work with all of them. Everyone had excellent contributions and really deep experience. It's a bit too unfortunate that Javier is not on the call. His experience with Trace, I think anyone on this call would be really get a lot of benefit of learning from his experience there, because he's had a lot of success with both the academic quality and credentials and getting business uptake and really forming useful products that are like delivering both excellent science and kind of impact on society. So yeah, it's really exciting field, and I'm really glad to see the other presenters talk more in detail about the research. Thank you, Stefan.
So the next talk is by Victor Maus, postdoc member of my research group here at VU Vienna. And with his talk, we will dive deeper into the satellite data story and learn how satellite data and Earth observation can be used to map economic activities, taking the example of global mining. So Victor, the floor is yours. Please take over.
Okay, thank you, Stefan, for the introduction. I will share my screen here so that we can get started. Can you see it already?
Yes, it works well.
Perfect then. Okay, so thank you. It's really a pleasure to be actually for the first time talking to this community here, which is not my original. Perhaps I would represent a little bit more the more biophysical or earth scientists, which Daniel was mentioning before. And also thank you, Daniel, for the great introduction. I think that will really makes a good base for me to start here. And yeah, my talk, as Stefan mentioned, is on using Earth observation data to map economical activities. And I will bring an example of the global mining sector. Right, we have been also working on biomass and agricultural commodities, but given the time limit, we only will show the examples for the mining sector today. So here we go. Here at VU, we are running a project called FinePrint, which is funded by the European Research Council, ERC, and led by my colleague Stefan Giljum, who you know is the chair of our seminar today. And this project, the main goal is to link the international supply chains and subnational supply chains, as you see in the right side of this slide, to local impacts of raw material extraction and production. And in this project, we try to cover as many commodities as possible, mining sector and also from the biomass and agricultural sector. And here one question one might pose, and I'm not going to focus so much in the linkage in the supply chains, but I will focus here on how the satellites can provide better data to improve this kind of supply chains assessment. And one main question here that I put at the beginning already of this presentation is how to measure direct and indirect impacts driven by distant economic drivers. That's how about, and one of the main or the most obvious answer for this would be the use of satellite data, as the satellite is the only source that can provide global coverage, as Daniel has already mentioned, and provides spatially split in a higher resolution so that we can actually follow all the chains on the land surface. And how does this whole work then? So usually this is, let's say, a very simplified model or framework that we use to extract information from the satellite data. So we have, let's say, the human knowledge, which can be, we know, or we give meaning to the things, we give labels, we have a crop type, we have a mining, and this mining has a type. And we combine this knowledge with the measurements of satellites, which are not, they don't have a semantic meaning that we could use directly to connect to economical activities, but they measure basically wavelengths, they measure reflectance from the surface. So some bands of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we combine these to the human semantics of things, and we also add here then, well, I'm calling here artificial intelligence, but some could question it. So artificial intelligence or machine learning, statistical learning. I'm not going to go in details into the difference of these terms, but this is more or less the basic framework which we use to produce information that can help on economic activities. So here we have some examples of the land cover maps produced by ESA. And this actually at the moment has a major problem. And this is that these data products that are available at global level, they usually have an inadequate semantics to provide information for economical activities. So we can see this in this example here. This is this ESA land cover maps. And we can see two red colored areas in the figure, one in the middle, the other one in the right side. And both of them are called urban areas in the legend of this map. So the semantic meaning of this color is an urban area. However, one of these areas is actually a big iron mine in Brazil called Carajás, which you probably know. And yeah, so usually these problems, they have this issue, and to make use of the satellite data, we have to improve the semantics of the global products. And what we have here in this example, we have the mine in the left side, and we have the urban area in the right side. And if this, as you can see, has a clear distinction for the human eyes, we can clearly, anyone could distinguish between this mine and the urban area. Why the land cover maps do not distinguish them? So what's the issue there? So one big issue with these automated methods like machine learning or other statistical learning methods is that they require a large amount of data to train. They could potentially distinguish between these two if they have enough data from where they can learn from. And humans have to give meaning to this data before the machines can learn how to do that. So that's the biggest challenge. And the problem is that this data is not yet available. So what we did here in the Fine Print project was to work on that, step a little bit back and start giving some semantic meaning to this spatially split data. And we started mapping the mining sector across the whole world. And we produced we produced a data set which has more than 21,000 polygons covering all types of mines and different mining features or ground features, like the open cut of the mine is covered there, the infrastructure or water ponds, rock piles, and etc. So many things that are related to mine were mapped here. And we covered this by using visual interpretation of satellite images, which can be quite exhausting, actually. But we have a help of some students which worked close to us and very hard. And this data set got quite a good accuracy for the what they call here users accuracy. I don't know if all you are familiar with this users accuracy, but this means that how much the user of the data can trust that the areas we mapped as mine are actually mine on the ground. So we got a quite high accuracy on that. So the mines are trusted. However, we missed quite some areas, about 20% of that, as shown by the other accuracy measurement here, which is called producer's accuracy. So this data set then put all together adds up to 50,000 squared kilometers of area, and is spatially split in a very high resolution, as we used high resolution satellite images to derive them. The data is also available from the Pangea platform, so anyone can use it. We produced an open data set under a Creative Commons license, so anyone can access it. With this data set, and now we can actually, as we have the mines there, we can explore different impacts or different profiles in different regions of the world. As in this example here from our manuscript, which is now accepted for publication, the Nature Scientific Data, we see that 51% of the area, the mapped area, mining area, is within 5 countries: China, Australia, USA, Russia, and Chile. And we can also see that these countries, they have a different profile. As we see here, like for example, in this table in the upper corner of the slide, Australia and China, they have very similar figures on mining area. However, they have very different figures in the number of polygons that have been mapped. Quite a difference, like China has 5,557 polygons mapped and Australia on 1,797 polygons. This is due to different characteristics in the mining, where Australia we have more large scale mining and in China more small scale mining, but spread all over. So more difficult and more harder to actually map in China with visual interpretation. So other things, we can also cross our data with, for example, the commodities, and join commodity information and find out which commodities are responsible for most of the area taken in the mining sector. In this case here, we see the example of in Indonesia, in the East Kalimantan, where we have a lot of coal mining, which is quite recent mining. And this globally, the coal mining adds up to 20,000 square kilometers, more or less. And moving forward, we can also cross these data sets with biomes and measure how much area is within each biome worldwide. And this provides us with some proxies for the, and this relates to the previous question from Elizabeth about how can we measure, for example, biodiversity. But when we cross with different data sets, we have different measurements of biodiversity. We can estimate these figures by crossing the two spatially split data. So this is one example of what we are doing here with this data set. And we can already see here that a large proportion of this mining sector is actually happening in tropical forests, which have a high biodiversity, as we know. And besides that, we cannot forget that the impacts of the economical activities are not happening only in the exact location where they are, where the production is happening, but it can also drive some indirect change. And we crossed also our data with the forest loss for tropical regions. And as you can see in this graph here in the right side, the first country here, Indonesia, we see, and these colors here go gradually getting closer to the mine. We see that as we get closer to the mine, the deforestation is higher for many countries like Indonesia, Kenya, Ghana, Colombia, and Nicaragua. So we see this same pattern over many regions. Of course, this doesn't hold for every country, but we see this. And then the question that we can pose here now is like, is this higher deforestation closer to the mines driven by the mining activity or not? Or what are the causes of this higher deforestation? So these are all questions that we can answer and provide better information to assess the economic activities and the global supply chains.
Victor, you have 2 minutes left.
Yes, perfect. I'm the last slide.
Great.
So wrapping up everything, we then can see here as one example that satellites Earth observation can fill the data gap and can provide really very rich information about the economic activities and the impacts of this. So we have this two problems. We have to map the economical activities and also the impact so that we can relate them. And these pose some challenges, which are also not only for this community, but also for remote sensing and Earth system scientists. This poses some issues and challenges on large-scale data collections and the development of algorithms that can provide the proper semantics information to let's say join the biophysical world and the economics and social science. And with that, I close my presentation. And I would like to thank you, and also to thank you in special our 3 students here, Jason sitting in Brazil, Michel here in Austria, and Jakob, who worked really hard to get these mines mapped across the whole world. And you can also explore the mining sites in our webpage, findprint.global/viewer. Just access, you can explore all these mining polygons worldwide. Thank you for your attention.
Our third speaker, and moving back here to the program, we've talked about mostly about flows, material flows so far, but now we also include the material stock dimension. And the third presenter is Jing Guo from Nagoya University in Japan. And she will talk about urban development and sustainability challenges from a 4D GIS assessment perspective. And yeah, a special thanks to you, Jing, that you are willing to join this session. I know it's already very late in Japan time. So thanks a lot for being with us and giving the presentation. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Stefan. Let me share my screen. Does it work well?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Everything okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Jane. I'm from Nagoya University. So this is my first time to be invited to give a presentation in such kind of a conference online. And I'm happy to be here, even though now it's midnight in Japan. And the first 2 speakers gave excellent presentations about the satellite technologies for a very large scale. But my presentation will give you another stories. So when we talk about the urban development, especially in developing countries, we always talk about the urbanization in recent decades. It's very hot topic in developing countries. Maybe it's not hot anymore in Europe or in America, in such Western countries, but in Asian or in Africa, the urbanization is a very hot research topic. During this process of urbanization, is a huge amount of buildings has been constructed in the city to support this process, to give people the living house or the office, such kind of places. Along with such construction activities, substantial amount of construction materials are required to input into the society and to provide such kind of service. So the China now is the largest, let me change to the laser point. Okay, the China now is the largest owner of the building stock in the world, and it is expected to grow up in the near future. And of course, we also have a lot of the construction material stocks correspondingly. Besides this urbanization, so there is another process as a part of urbanization, that is urban renewal or redevelopment. So we know a lot of new constructions happening in the new sites, like the suburban area or green fields, but another parts of the urbanization actually happen inside of the city, and like to transformation of the old industry base or residential area. So this question actually is a worldwide question. So even in the developed country, the government also need to renew the old areas in the city. So in such kind of case, we firstly need to demolish the existing buildings in the city, and then we need to input another new round of the construction materials to build up our new communities. So in this case, it also drives the material flows and the stock dynamics in the city. But so far, maybe there's not so much studies to focus on this question. So my research will focus on this, and to assess the material stock and flow in such kind of a city development issues or questions, we developed the 4DGS database, compiled multiple data like geospatial data and other historical documents, and we set up this 4DGS database. And based on it, we estimated the material flows and the stock. In my research, so there is a very tiny study area were selected compared to the previous global scale. It's very small. So the area is only around 10 square kilometers. So it's in China. It's in one northeast city. So this district is very famous old industry base in China, and it was set up by Japanese governments in the early 20th centuries. And it has made a great contributions to the construction of New China after 1950s. So let's have a look at the 4DGS database first. So the yellow, the buildings are the industry buildings, and the blue are residential buildings first. Since the 1910 and in the following years. So that's our database. So we digitalize the buildings one by one, and you can easily see every buildings and how they look like. And so since the 2000 year, the red buildings showed up. That is the commercial and other buildings, and 2004 and until 2018. So this database can easily show us since the 2000 year, it's changed very rapidly and changed very differently. So before the 2000 year, the material stock is dominated by the industrial buildings, but after that, it changed to the residential and commercial use. So even though the material stock didn't ever decrease, but its composition has been totally changed. And regarding the material typology, it was dominated by the brick for most of the history, but at present, the sand, gravel, and the cement, those primary materials for the concrete and the mortar, occupies the most part of the total stock. So when we look at the flows, so the over half of inflows and over 90% of outflows occur since the 2002. Because after in the 2002, the government started to implement a strategy of redevelopment. So if we look at the inflow and outflow, it draws out a discussion of how to recycle our material demolition waste on the site. So actually, if we can recycle all materials, demolition waste on site, so maybe those outflow part can be reused into the new buildings. But apparently the total inflow are larger than the total outflow. That means even though we fully recycle all the outflows, we couldn't satisfy the inflows demand. So here it's a opportunity to think about how to make it more effective to recycle the on-site demolition waste. So there is another point in our research is the city metabolism is speeding up. So this is the survival curve for the industry and the residential buildings, especially for the 2000 year to around 2010. So this period, it was the government strategy implementation reason, because they have a very quick and rapid drop in these two survival curves. So such kind of compression of curves with this steep slopes, so it results to the very short building lifetimes, as short as 2 to 6 years for those cohorts. So it's a very serious issues for the buildings actually. So it was designed for at least 50 years in China for the buildings, and I think it's much longer in European or American, such Western countries. But in this case, it only has the 6 years, so it's a very a tragedy for the buildings. So it's time to rethink about the short-lived buildings. So if we think about from the perspective of environmental impact, maybe longer buildings is better because we can save more construction materials input or reduce the material consumption and reduce the demolition waste generation. But if we look at that the situation of that city, so in the late 20th century, the city, that area was undergoing a very serious recession. So the city and the government tried to transform it and revitalize that area. So from the perspective of social and economic benefits, maybe it's good to have a new area and a new buildings here. So we couldn't simply judge it's good or bad, but it's give us a like story or experience to for other cases. If we want to copy this model or examples to other cases, like we still have many other old industry or even old residential area in cities. So how to revitalize it, how to transform it, how to make it competitive again, how to make it more attractive for other for the citizens. So normally there are two options for those areas. One is to have new plans, but including the old areas. At the same time, the plans will retain these historical characters, like transform old industry base to the park for the tourism. Another way is to change it totally, like this case in our studies. So it's the urban renewal and the redevelopment. So this process revitalizes the old area into a very fresh urban area. But at the same time, it has some very big environmental impacts, like short-lived buildings and speeding metabolism in the city, and there is a high price in terms of construction materials and demolition waste generation. So our study actually gave us a chance to or opportunity to think about, can we avoid such rapid material metabolism? And during our the city development, sometimes we need to make some change, make some improvement for our cities. So there is like a conflict from between the socioeconomic development or human well-being improvement with the sustainability. So how can we improve the human well-being at the same time to achieve the urban sustainability? So if we have to make it, so if we have to have such change, has such big change. So we have to consider the material circularity and the recycling enhancement on site or in advance before the strategy was implemented. And we also need to consider the long-term safety plan, not only for like 5 years or 10 years. We need to make a like 100 years safety plan to avoid such the fast demolition and the new construction activities. So that's all for my presentation. So if you want to know more details about this, please welcome to read our papers. That's all. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, then let's move one more time to the program. We come to the final speaker, Neus Escobar from the University of Bonn in Germany. And actually here the circle somehow closes back to Dan's presentation. So we come back to spatially explicit footprint approaches, taking the example of mapping carbon emissions embodied in soy exports from Brazil. So Neus, we look forward to your presentation, and please take over on your side.
Muted. So I was saying that thanks for inviting me to this interdisciplinary session. I hope I can contribute my bit by bringing life cycle assessment perspectives, and indeed I will try to close the circle, as you said. So I'm Neus Escobar from the University of Bonn, and I will present essentially the results from our recent publication in the journal Global Environmental Change, in which we mapped carbon emissions embodied in Brazil soy exports with a spatially explicit life cycle assessment framework. This is the table of contents of the presentation, and I will start with a brief background. As you probably all know, trade is increasingly globalized also for agri-food, and this translates into a disconnection between consumption and the impacts of production, and as well as into complex supply chain dynamics. But this has further sustainability implications because we have seen that trade globalization has gone hand in hand with the displacement of resource-intensive activities and the associated impacts from industrialized to developing countries. For example, the case of deforestation in the tropics. And this poses also challenges for climate change mitigation, as well as for food security, for example, through eventual food price spikes. And in practice, this translates into larger and more interconnected environmental and social footprints. So I wanted to show this table to summarize the application and limitations of the three main approaches for environmental footprinting. But since Daniel already introduced some of those limitations, I would just go through it quickly. So as you already know, resource and emission footprints are mostly estimated with environmentally extended MRIO analysis. But I just wanted to point out that there's also another framework known as physical trade accounting. And it's used to estimate commodity-specific impacts embodied in trade, mainly of food and agri-food products, such as land use or deforestation footprints. This method relies mainly on Faustat data and other assumptions to develop a global accounting system which is able to identify trade flows from sourcing countries to the countries of consumption in physical units. But same as, well, in this case, the sectoral resolution is limited by Faustat data, which can bring a higher level of resolution relative to available monetary input-output tables. But in any case, those two approaches face limitations because national level data masks heterogeneity in agricultural production and transportation systems, which can lead to inaccurate footprints, especially for agricultural products, for example, for commodities produced in large and heterogeneous countries such as Brazil. And then there's also life cycle assessment, which is also used to estimate product-specific footprints for a suite of environmental impacts. And as a product level approach, it provides high level of detail for a limited number of supply chains considered as average. And this provides case study specific results with low spatial and temporal resolution, which cannot be considered representative for a whole sector. But then there's TRACE. This is the tool that already Daniel introduced, developed at the Stockholm Environment Institute, and it can be considered as an enhanced physical trade accounting model. And TRACE relies on very diverse data, such as national registry data for each country or custom data, bills of lading, etc., to be able to trace physical trade flows from the municipality of origin via traders and importers to the country of import. And TRACE has a focus on deforestation mainly, deforestation embodied in agricultural products. And the number of products covered by TRACE is increasing. I guess in the last yearbook, they said they already cover almost or more than half of the total trade volume in agri-food. This is just a screenshot about of how TRACE looks. In this case, you can trace the soy flow from Mato Grosso, but also we can go back, we can downscale it to the municipality of origin, associated to the corresponding biome. Then we know the trader, importer, and the final country of destination of that flow in a given year. So we saw that this has a great potential to be used for, as combined with life cycle assessment principles, to develop a hybrid bottom-up framework to quantify spatially explicit, in this case, carbon footprints of globally traded agricultural commodities for the entire export volume, as is not possible with life cycle assessment, for example, and at an unprecedented level of resolution, in this case, per individual supply chain at the product level, as is not the case for either physical trade accounting or environmentally extended MRIO. And the case study, for the case study, we chose Brazilian soy, because soy is the most internationally traded agricultural commodity in the world. Brazil is, together with the US, the world's leading soy producer and exporter. And soy expansion in Brazil is directly linked to natural vegetation loss in the Amazon and Cerrado biomes in the last decades. Nowadays, the new hotspot or the new agricultural frontier for soy-induced deforestation has shifted from the center-west region to the northeastern Cerrado region, this red zone, and it's located in the so-called Mato Piba region, which refers to the states of Maranhão, Tocantins, Piauí, and Bahia. And this mostly affects the Cerrado biome. And this is why deforestation remains a major contributor to the carbon footprint of Brazilian soy. So as for the methods, we applied a conventional or attributional life cycle assessment according to the ISO standards. This consists of three main steps, namely defining the goal and the scope, life cycle inventory, and life cycle impact assessment. Then the goal of our study was to estimate the carbon footprint of Brazilian soy exports per ton of product and the associated spatial variability. We covered soy exports from Brazilian municipalities through international markets in the period 2010-2015. The system boundaries were defined from cradle to gate, which refers to all the steps that go from the production of the feedstock up to the stage in which the product, either beans, cake, or oil, entered the corresponding industry as intermediate products. And the functional unit or reference flow to be able to compare all those supply chains was 1 ton of soybean equivalent, defined in tons of raw beans that enter each supply chain. And this allows us to compare supply chains that end up being different products, namely beans, cake, and oil. And for the life cycle impact assessment, we only consider the global warming potential as carbon dioxide equivalent. This is a summary of the system, just to show that in our life cycle or supply chain, we included forest cover loss or land use change, not only forest, but also any form of woody biomass, to include savanna, for example. Then also agricultural production, including not only field emissions, but also all the emissions associated to the production of inputs. Domestic transport from the municipality to the port of export in Brazil, transoceanic transport, and industrial processing, in this case, crushing into oil and cake. And this step could take, depending on the supply chain, could take place in Brazil or in the country of import. So this is, for example, one supply chain of soybean produced in a municipality in Mato Grosso, exported via the port of Santos in Sao Paulo, and imported by the port of Rotterdam. It's worth noting that we didn't include re-exports of soy, which can still be re-exported, as in the case of the Netherlands. But this is only one supply chain. We did this for almost 90,000 supply chains identified by trace in the period of analysis. Let me say that supply chain, we define it as the unique combination of producing municipality plus logistic hub where soy is stored or crushed in Brazil, port of export, and importing country where crushing can also take place, depending on the case. So this was the simplification, and now this is a more complex picture of the system that we considered in order to organize the data collection efforts, because as Dan has already said, life cycle assessment is very data intensive. So we had to use diverse sources of information to gather the inventory data at the highest level of resolution possible, in this case, at the municipality level. For example, but deforestation or land use change was estimated based on remote sensing and GIS by overlaying soy expansion maps at the polygon level with forest cover loss maps only for the Amazon and Cerrado. And let me say that for land use change emissions, we considered forest cover loss observed in the prior 2 years to the year in which soybean was established, to also consider indirect emissions from deforestation.
Neus, you have 4 minutes left.
Really? So I have to rush. This is just to show that the inventory data, and now I can go through with the results. So because our framework estimates emissions at the product level, we were able to aggregate them at the municipality level. And this is the carbon footprint of soy exporting municipalities in the period of analysis. We can see that land use change makes the greatest contribution to the carbon footprint of each municipality, and the largest footprints are located indeed in the Matopiba region. In the same way, we can estimate the carbon footprint per state and also biome. We can see that the top 5 is the Matopiba states plus Pará. For example, the carbon footprint of Piauí is almost 6 times larger than Brazil's average. In the same way, we can estimate carbon footprints from an importer-based perspective. And we see that European countries, we see a bunch of European countries in the top 10 of the largest footprints per ton of product, together with China. And since we also have data on the total export volume, we can also estimate total greenhouse gas emissions embodied in soybean imports. And we can see that, of course, China has the largest footprint, followed by the Netherlands, and then Spain, which had the largest footprint per ton of imported product. We can do the same at supranational level, and indeed China plus Taiwan and Hong Kong accounted for almost 60% of the total emissions generated by soybean trade. But one of the main findings was that land use change emissions embodied in European imports account for half of the carbon footprint of Europe, and in absolute terms, this implies more CO2 than land use change emissions generated by China, which tells us that Europe is importing soybean from municipalities where soybean is associated to deforestation recently. And I would just like to close my presentation with a brief discussion. Our approach has proven an extremely large spatial variability in the carbon footprint between Brazilian municipalities, states, and biome. This shows the importance of considering subnational resolution when estimating environmental footprints of agricultural products. The largest footprints are associated are found for the Matopiba states due to land use change, but also domestic transport makes an important contribution in very export-oriented states such as Goiás and Mato Grosso. One of the limitations of our framework is that since we don't include re-export, this does not yet provide consumption-based footprints as compared to multi-regional input-output. And it is a very data-intensive approach, which makes it difficult to replicate it for all commodities in trace and also for other impacts besides global warming. And just a few conclusions for policymaking. These results highlight the need to prevent deforestation in the agricultural frontier in the Amazon and Cerrado biomes to reduce carbon emissions from trading Brazilian soy. And our approach can further be used to assess the cost effectiveness of policies or supply chain adaptations for reducing greenhouse gases from both producer and importer perspectives, and also has great potential to estimate carbon footprints of traders based on the information on trace. Overall, this can provide transparent data for more effective and coordinated environmental interventions, such as multi-stakeholders initiatives, while informing the debate on the global responsibility of the impacts of agricultural production and trade. So that's all. This is the link to the publication in case you are interested, and I hope I didn't take much of the time from the discussion.
Minutes. I would like to come to an end with this session by just giving you an outline of the way ahead. So the sessions, the presentations of today's second session will, as the first session, will be available to watch online at the ISIE YouTube channel. You have the full link here, but you can also easily Google them or search them on the YouTube platform. As Hiroki already mentioned early on, we are already planning the next sessions. So the next session will take place likely in the first half of October, focusing on the issue of resource constraints of the required green transition. And we have a range of other topics in preparation, which you can also see here, the list. And of course, we hope that the Corona situation in the near future allows us again to start planning the next face-to-face biannual SEM conferences as we used to have in the past. But in the meantime, we definitely want to continue communicating with the community through these online sessions. And if you have any feedback in terms of comments, suggestions, please get in contact with us through the metabolism email that you see here on the last slide. Yeah, so we've reached the final point of this session. Thank you very much for being with us and joining this session. And all of the SEM board members, we are very much looking forward to seeing many of you in one of the upcoming events. So stay healthy and goodbye.